The age of mental slavery, how we became prisoners of our own minds. Picture this for a moment. You wake up tomorrow and realize that everything you thought you knew about freedom was an elaborate illusion. That despite living in what we call the most liberated era in human history, your mind has been quietly colonized by forces so subtle, so pervasive, that you never even noticed the chains being forged around your consciousness. This isn't science fiction. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is the hidden reality of modern existence, where billions of people walk through life believing they are making their own choices while their thoughts, desires, and even their dreams are being shaped by invisible architects of influence. Today, we're going to expose the most dangerous form of slavery humanity has ever faced. Not the slavery of the body, which history has shown us can be broken, but the slavery of the mind, which most people don't even recognize exists. We'll uncover how this mental imprisonment was constructed, who benefits from it, and most crucially, how you can break free from chains you never knew you were wearing. Do you still believe that genuine freedom is possible? What you're about to discover will fundamentally alter how you see yourself, your choices, and the world around you. The journey we're embarking on isn't comfortable. Truth rarely is. But for those brave enough to question everything, the rewards are immeasurable. Let's begin. The illusion of original thought. The first and most shocking truth we must confront is this: most of what you call your thoughts aren't actually yours at all. They're the product of a sophisticated system of mental programming that begins before you can even speak and continues until the day you die. Think about your preferences right now. Your favorite food, your political views, your career aspirations, even your definition of love. Where did these come from? Did you consciously choose them through careful deliberation and analysis? Or did they emerge from a complex web of family conditioning, peer pressure, media influence, and cultural programming? The uncomfortable reality is that the vast majority of human beings are walking around with borrowed minds, thinking borrowed thoughts, and living borrowed lives. They believe they are individuals, but they are actually products of mass psychological manufacturing. The philosopher Jean Baudrillard warned us about this decades ago when he described the concept of hyperreality, a condition where simulated experiences become more real to us than actual reality. We don't just consume media, we are consumed by it. We don't just have opinions, we are possessed by them. But how did we get here? How did a species that once questioned everything become so docile, so accepting of mental imprisonment? The evolution of invisible control. The answer lies in understanding the evolution of control. Throughout history, power structures have learned that the most effective way to dominate people isn't through physical force, it's through controlling what they think and believe. The Roman emperors knew this when they gave the masses bread in circuses. The medieval church knew this when they controlled access to knowledge. And today's power brokers know this when they flood our minds with endless distractions and manufactured controversies. The modern system of mental slavery is more sophisticated than anything humanity has ever seen. It doesn't announce itself with chains and whips. Instead, it seduces you with convenience, entertains you with spectacle, and convinces you that your imprisonment is actually freedom. Consider how your day begins. You wake up and immediately check your phone, allowing algorithms designed by teams of neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists to determine what information enters your consciousness first. These algorithms don't exist to inform you, they exist to capture and monetize your attention. You think you're choosing what to read, watch, or think about, but you're actually being led through a carefully constructed maze of psychological manipulation. The brilliant social psychologist Sherry Turkle has documented how digital technology is rewiring our brains for dependence and shallowness. We're becoming what she calls tethered selves, unable to exist without constant digital validation and stimulation. Our capacity for deep thought, solitary reflection, and genuine self-knowledge is systematically being eroded. But the digital realm is just one front in this war for your mind. The educational system, which most people trust implicitly, is another powerful tool of mental conditioning. Rather than teaching students how to think, it teaches them what to think. Rather than encouraging genuine inquiry, it rewards conformity and regurgitation. The historian John Taylor Gatto spent 30 years as a teacher before becoming one of the most vocal critics of modern education. His research revealed that compulsory schooling was never designed to create independent thinkers. It was designed to produce compliant workers and obedient citizens. The system teaches children to accept authority without question, to value external validation over internal wisdom, and to compete rather than collaborate. By the time most people reach adulthood, they have been so thoroughly conditioned to seek approval from external authorities that they have lost touch with their own inner compass. They mistake the voice of social conditioning for their authentic self. This mental programming doesn't end with formal education. It continues and intensifies through what we call normal adult life. The beautiful prison of modern life. The workplace becomes another laboratory for psychological conditioning, where people learn to suppress their authentic selves in exchange for economic security. The media bombards them with images of what success, happiness, and fulfillment supposedly look like. Consumer culture teaches them that their worth is determined by what they own rather than who they are. The result is a population of adults who are psychologically infantile, seeking constant external guidance and validation, unable to trust their own judgment or live according to their own values. They have become what the philosopher Herbert Marcuse called one-dimensional people, capable of thinking only within the narrow parameters that have been established for them. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of this mental slavery is that it disguises itself as choice. We live in a culture that celebrates diversity and individuality while simultaneously ensuring that all choices lead to the same destination: psychological dependence and spiritual emptiness. You can choose from hundreds of television channels, but they all deliver the same basic message: consume, conform, don't think too deeply. You can choose from dozens of political candidates, but they all operate within a system that serves the same fundamental interests. You can choose from thousands of products, but they're all designed to create the same outcome: temporary satisfaction followed by renewed craving. This illusion of choice is what keeps the system stable. People feel free because they're constantly making selections, but the menu itself was written by others. They never question who decided what options would be available in the first place. The philosopher Aldous Huxley predicted this in his novel, Brave New World, where he envisioned a society that would control people not through pain and fear, but through pleasure and distraction. He wrote, "A really efficient totalitarian state would be one in which the all-powerful executive of political bosses and their army of managers control a population of slaves who do not have to be coerced, because they love their servitude." This is exactly where we find ourselves today. We love our servitude because we don't recognize it as servitude. We mistake our chains for ornaments, our prison cells for homes. The psychology of voluntary servitude. But why do people accept this mental imprisonment so willingly? The answer lies in understanding the psychology of freedom itself. True freedom is terrifying because it comes with total responsibility. When you are genuinely free, you cannot blame anyone else for the state of your life. You cannot hide behind authorities, traditions, or popular opinion. You must face the vast uncertainty of existence with nothing but your own consciousness as a guide. Most people, when confronted with this level of responsibility, choose the comfort of mental slavery. They would rather have their choices made for them than face the anxiety of authentic self-determination. They prefer the security of following prescribed paths rather than the adventure of creating their own. This is what the existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre meant when he wrote that humans are condemned to be free. Freedom isn't a gift, it's a burden. And most people will do anything to avoid carrying that burden, even if it means surrendering their humanity in the process. The social psychologist Stanley Milgram demonstrated this in his famous obedience experiments, where ordinary people were willing to inflict apparent torture on innocent victims simply because an authority figure told them to do so. His research revealed that the majority of people will abandon their moral compass when directed by perceived authority, even when that authority has no real power over them. This tendency toward mental submission is exploited by every institution in modern society. Religious organizations promise salvation in exchange for unquestioning faith. Political movements offer belonging in exchange for ideological conformity. Corporations provide identity in exchange for consumer loyalty. Academic institutions grant credentials in exchange for intellectual compliance. Each of these institutions offers the same basic trade. Surrender your mental independence, and we will take care of the burden of thinking for you. And most people accept this trade eagerly, not realizing that in giving up their freedom to think, they are giving up their essential humanity. The spark that cannot be extinguished. But here's where our story takes a crucial turn. Because despite the overwhelming power of these systems of mental control, human consciousness itself contains the seeds of liberation. No matter how thoroughly conditioned a person becomes, there remains within them a spark of authentic awareness that cannot be completely extinguished. This spark is what the ancient philosophers called the divine flame within human beings. It's the part of you that sometimes wakes up in the middle of your programmed life and asks, is this really all there is? Is this really who I am? It's the voice that whispers doubts about beliefs you've held for years. It's the feeling of emptiness that persists despite having everything you were told would make you happy. Most people suppress this voice because listening to it would require them to question everything they've built their identity around. But for those brave enough to pay attention, this voice becomes the beginning of genuine liberation. The path to mental freedom begins with what the Buddhist tradition calls right awareness, the ability to observe your own thoughts and emotions without being completely identified with them. When you develop this capacity, you begin to notice how much of your mental activity consists of borrowed ideas, conditioned responses, and unconscious reactions. You start to see how your preferences were shaped by advertising, how your beliefs were influenced by family conditioning, how your fears were programmed by media consumption. This recognition can be deeply unsettling because it reveals how little of what you call yourself is actually authentic. But this unsettling phase is necessary. As the mystic Jiddu Krishnamurti taught, true learning cannot begin until you are willing to acknowledge the extent of your ignorance. You cannot free yourself from mental conditioning until you recognize how thoroughly conditioned you are. The tools of mental liberation. The next stage involves developing what we might call intellectual courage, the willingness to question any belief, no matter how cherished, if evidence suggests it might be false. This requires abandoning the need to be right in favor of the commitment to be truthful. It means being willing to admit that you might have been wrong about fundamental aspects of reality. This kind of intellectual honesty is rare because it's psychologically threatening. Our beliefs aren't just ideas we hold, they're often central to our sense of identity. To question them feels like psychological suicide. It is certainly difficult to undergo this kind of ego death in service of truth. Socrates embodied this principle when he claimed that the unexamined life is not worth living. He understood that mental freedom requires constant vigilance against the tendency to accept inherited beliefs without examination. His method of relentless questioning wasn't designed to provide answers, but to strip away false certainties and create space for genuine understanding. The Stoic philosophers developed techniques for mental liberation that remain relevant today. They taught students to distinguish between what is within their control and what is not, to examine their automatic reactions, and to develop emotional independence from external events. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his Meditations, reminded himself daily that his thoughts and reactions were his own responsibility, regardless of what others did or said. This represents a radical form of mental freedom, the recognition that your inner state is your choice, even when your external circumstances are not. Perhaps the most important aspect of mental liberation is learning to think dialectically rather than dogmatically. Dialectical thinking involves the ability to hold contradictory ideas in tension without rushing to resolve them prematurely. It requires comfort with uncertainty and ambiguity. Most people think in binaries, right or wrong, good or bad, us or them. This binary thinking is encouraged by political systems, religious institutions, and media organizations because it makes people easier to manipulate. When you can only see two options, whoever controls those options controls you. Dialectical thinking recognizes that reality is far more complex than any binary system can capture. It allows you to see that most situations contain elements of truth on multiple sides, that most problems require nuanced solutions, and that wisdom often lies in the synthesis of opposing viewpoints rather than the victory of one. This type of thinking is threatening to systems of control because it makes people less susceptible to propaganda and manipulation. A person who can think dialectically cannot be easily recruited into ideological movements or consumer campaigns because they retain the ability to see the complexity that ideologies and advertisements must suppress in order to be effective. The courage to stand alone. The development of dialectical thinking requires what we might call philosophical patience, the willingness to live with questions rather than rushing toward premature answers. In a culture that promises instant solutions to complex problems, this patience is revolutionary. It means being willing to say, "I don't know," when you don't know, rather than adopting beliefs simply to avoid uncertainty. It means being comfortable with the ongoing process of learning rather than seeking the security of fixed conclusions. It means valuing the quality of your questions more than the certainty of your answers. This philosophical patience is perhaps the most valuable skill you can develop in a world designed to keep you mentally enslaved. Because as long as you need immediate answers to complex questions, there will always be someone willing to provide those answers in exchange for your mental freedom. The journey toward authentic mental liberation also requires what we might call social courage, the willingness to stand apart from group consensus when your individual conscience demands it. This is perhaps the most difficult aspect of mental freedom because humans are fundamentally social creatures who depend on group acceptance for psychological security. Throughout history, every advance in human understanding has required individuals who were willing to endure social isolation in order to preserve their intellectual integrity. Galileo faced house arrest for insisting that the Earth revolved around the Sun. Darwin delayed publishing his theory of evolution for decades because he knew it would make him a social pariah. Thoreau went to jail rather than pay taxes that supported slavery. These individuals understood that conformity to social consensus often requires the betrayal of individual conscience. They chose the loneliness of truth over the comfort of accepted lies. In our current era, this social courage manifests as the willingness to think independently about issues that have been declared settled by popular opinion. It means being willing to examine taboo subjects, to question sacred beliefs, and to follow evidence wherever it leads, regardless of social consequences. This doesn't mean being contrarian for its own sake or rejecting all social norms without reason. It means maintaining your capacity for independent judgment even when that judgment conflicts with popular opinion. It means being willing to be misunderstood, criticized, or ostracized rather than surrendering your mental autonomy. Freedom as a daily practice. But perhaps the most radical aspect of mental liberation is the recognition that freedom itself is not a destination but a practice. You don't achieve mental freedom once and then maintain it effortlessly. You must choose it again and again, moment by moment, thought by thought, decision by decision. Every time you encounter new information, you have a choice: will you examine it critically or accept it passively? Every time you face social pressure to conform, you have a choice: will you maintain your individual judgment or surrender to group consensus? Every time you feel the pull of comfortable beliefs, you have a choice: will you remain open to new possibilities or close yourself off in defense of certainty? Mental freedom requires constant vigilance because the forces of mental enslavement never rest. They adapt and evolve, finding new ways to capture and colonize consciousness. The price of mental liberty, like political liberty, is eternal vigilance. This vigilance must be applied not only to external influences but to internal ones as well. Your own psychological conditioning, your emotional attachments, your ego investments in particular beliefs, these can all become sources of mental imprisonment if left unexamined. The path of mental liberation is ultimately a path of radical self-honesty. It requires the willingness to confront everything about yourself that you would prefer to avoid, your prejudices, your fears, your self-deceptions, your unconscious motivations. This confrontation is difficult because it threatens the comfortable story you tell yourself about who you are. But this discomfort is the price of authenticity. As Carl Jung observed, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The things that trigger your strongest reactions are often pointing to aspects of your own psychology that you haven't fully integrated or understood. Mental freedom means taking responsibility for all of your psychological reactions rather than blaming them on external circumstances or other people. It means recognizing that your emotional responses are generated by your interpretations of events, not by the events themselves. This recognition is liberating because it reveals that you have far more control over your inner experience than you might have believed. You cannot control what happens to you, but you can control how you interpret and respond to what happens to you. This control is the foundation of all genuine freedom. Why freedom matters, the cost of mental slavery. As we near the end of this exploration, it's important to address a crucial question. If mental slavery is so pervasive and mental freedom is so difficult, why should anyone attempt this journey? Why not simply accept the comfortable illusions that make life easier? The answer lies in understanding what we lose when we surrender our mental autonomy. When we allow others to think for us, we lose access to our own deepest wisdom. When we conform to social expectations rather than following our individual path, we lose the opportunity to discover our unique contribution to the world. When we accept inherited beliefs without examination, we lose the possibility of genuine spiritual understanding. Most fundamentally, when we remain mentally enslaved, we never discover who we truly are beneath all the conditioning and programming. We live and die as strangers to ourselves, never knowing what we might have become if we had possessed the courage to think for ourselves. The journey toward mental freedom is not about achieving some final state of enlightenment. It's about becoming fully human, fully awake, fully alive. It's about reclaiming your birthright as a conscious being capable of independent thought and authentic choice. This journey is not easy, but it is necessary. Because in a world where mental slavery has become the norm, every person who achieves genuine mental freedom becomes a beacon of possibility for others. They demonstrate that liberation is possible, that the chains of conditioning can be broken, that authentic individuality can be achieved. The world desperately needs such individuals. Not rebels without a cause, but conscious beings who have done the difficult work of examining their own minds and freeing themselves from unconscious conditioning. People who can think clearly because they have learned to see through the fog of propaganda and manipulation. People who can act authentically because they know the difference between their true self and their conditioned personality. Your choice, freedom or comfort. The choice before you is simple but not easy. Will you continue to live as a mentally enslaved person, comfortable in your conditioning but forever limited by it? Or will you undertake the challenging but rewarding journey toward authentic mental freedom? The path exists. The methods have been tested by thousands of individuals throughout history. The only question is whether you possess the courage to walk it. If this exploration has awakened something in you, don't let that awakening die in the noise of daily life. Share this message with others who might be ready to hear it. Engage in the comments with your own insights and questions. Most importantly, begin the practice of examining your own mind with the same rigor you would apply to any other important endeavor. Because the ultimate truth is this: your freedom is not something that can be given to you by others, nor is it something that can be taken away by others. It is something you must claim for yourself, moment by moment, choice by choice, thought by thought. The prison door has been unlocked. The question now is whether you will walk through it. The journey toward mental freedom begins with a single step: the decision to start thinking for yourself. Everything else follows from there. Will you take that step? Will you join the quiet revolution of consciousness that is already underway? Will you become one of the free? The choice, as always, is yours. Choose wisely. Choose courageously. Choose freedom. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Stay curious, stay awake, and above all, keep thinking for yourself.